Welcome to the Fundamental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Saladino. This podcast is the result of my relentless search to understand and correct the roots of chronic disease and illness. In this podcast, I will share with you everything I have learned about how to live the most healthy and radical life possible. Thanks for joining me on this journey. What is up, you guys? Welcome to yet another edition of the Fundamental Health Podcast. By the time this podcast goes out, I am in Africa. Right now, I am hopefully running around somewhere in the bush with a Hadza, hunting with a bow that they made or that I made with them. Stay tuned on socials for all the updates, but I am in Africa right now, hunting with a Hadza, learning about how this indigenous group of hunter-gatherers is still living on the face of the earth. And I'll tell you what, based on everything I've read and everything I've seen, they eat nose to tail and they appreciate the value of organ meats. So I can't wait to report on that live. But if you need more organ meats in your life, check us out at heartandsoil.co. We make the finest grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively raised, desiccated organ supplements. I took beef organs with me. I took gut and digestion with me, and I took histamine and immune with me. I was debating which ones to take, but those are the three I took. I wanted gut and digestion to just support my gut while I'm in a place eating all sorts of weird foods and new bacteria. Beef organs I love as the ultimate multivitamin, and histamine and immune is now back in the store. We've got a full store at Heart and Soil. Histamine immune has thymus in it with a peptide called thymosin alpha 1, which I knew would support my immune system traveling. I'm fully recovered from COVID, so not really worried, but I knew that I might come in contact with new microbes and viruses and stuff. So anyway, those are the three I took. Check us out at Heart and Soil to reclaim your ancestral birthright to radical health. And you can always email me, Dr. Paul, drpaul, heartandsoil.co, if you have questions about which supplement might be best for you. I also hope that you will subscribe to my newsletter. You can go to heartandsoil.co to do that. I send out daily updates about what I'm doing, stories, embarrassing things, triumphs, failures, all kinds of good stuff in there. And information. I try and deliver a ton of value in my newsletter. Check it out, heartandsoil.co. Sign up for that. This week's podcast, I'm really excited about this one. I got to have my friend Stephen Lin, who is a biologic dentist, on the podcast. He is in Australia. We had an amazing conversation about what actually causes tooth decay. While I'm in Africa, rest assured that I really am going to be looking at the health of these Hadza teeth and really trying to recreate the work of Weston, which is what Stephen is interested in. But in this podcast, we answer questions like, what really causes tooth decay? Is it sugar or is it something else? Hint, I think it's fat-soluble vitamin deficiency. And the way to correct that is by getting a lot of good organs in your diet, right? Of course. So this is an amazing podcast. I love things that kind of connect the dots. I think oral health is a reflection of overall health as a human. And what a cool way to think about it with a conversation with a biologic dentist who also thinks outside of the box like me. So enjoy this conversation with Stephen Lin. You will probably never think about brushing your teeth and oral health the same way again. I certainly don't. All right, Dr. Stephen Lin, thanks for coming on the podcast, my man.
Hey man, it's great to meet you. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh yeah, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I love the idea that we can talk about dental health with an expert in that. And what's so interesting, and I think what the listeners will hear in this podcast, is that the dental ideas that we're going to be talking about are going to mirror so many of the ideas in the rest of the body. And that's not surprising because, as I'm sure you say, and other widely or wise dentists would say, the mouth is going to mirror the rest of the whole body. So this is going to be a fun conversation. So I've got a question for you to start. And I think the listener may like this one. Stephen, how did Marilyn Monroe eat? What was Marilyn Monroe's diet?
Yeah, it's funny.
Like icon of beauty.
Right? Like you think about, a female icon of beauty, probably, a picture of health of a time.
Right.
Today, that kind of, person, would probably, associated with a certain type of diet. But Marilyn Monroe was very specific with how she ate, in terms of she would not eat kind of takeaway or restaurant food. She would make sure she went to get a cut of meat, like, any kind of cut of meat that she would just cook up herself. She would have that, eggs and butter, and that was her kind of diet. She was very meat based, and it's really funny to think now that this kind of conversation besides people like yourself, in that kind of circles, not really thought that you'd be eating that way when you're kind of a picture of health. And it's strange that we've moved away, but I think we've got to start thinking about these things.
I don't know why we've lost that idea, because as we're going to talk about, all of these pictures that Weston Price took of these tribes in Africa that are really the original pictures of health. And hopefully we'll show some videos or some pictures in this podcast. And these African tribes, men and women, and these people from Northern Europe, they all look like models to us today. And they were all eating the same kind of diet, as we'll talk about. So it's not really surprising anthropologically or ethnographically, but I just saw something on my Instagram the other day that made me just want to vomit in my mouth. And it was Kim Kardashian saying, "Thanks Beyond Meat for all the great food. I'm going vegan." And I was like, oh my God. I'm not, okay, let's just establish this right now. Kim Kardashian is not really my picture of health. She's extremely synthetic, but that is an icon of health that we might think of today. And in Hollywood, which unfortunately seems to dictate the way we think about so many of these trends today, the trend is certainly away from animal foods. And that's why you and I do what what we do,
Totally. And actually, when I wrote my book, actually, I think it was more like kind of 2015, 16, I was finishing the manuscript. And, I was really looking at kind of, because I made a food pyramid and everything in it, and I wanted it to kind of be meat-based, but I was a little scared to kind of say it. I thought, I didn't think that would resonate with people. I didn't think people would see that as a good kind of basis for health. And then kind of since then, people like yourself have kind of taken on this kind of, and there's been a bit of a trend towards actually moving back to meat again. And yeah, you're right. Like, it's crazy that, people, people of influence are certainly kind of getting ideas about health out there that aren't exactly, what were designed to eat or to do. But, this isn't all that long ago. And we're just completely, 180 turn from what was thought as, good for the human body.
It's so ironic, and it's so important, I think, to correct these notions that are just totally false. And that's why, I think humans have just been so misled by all of this, and it's resulting in negative health for a lot of people. So, you've certainly, done a deep dive into the work of Weston Price, who's kind of this prototypic dentist, right? Tell us the story of Weston Price, and tell us what is found in his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and what the people in the 1930s and 1940s, at least, who had the best teeth were eating. Like, what do those people eat all over the world?
The tragic thing about Price is he's not the prototypic dentist anymore.
That's true.
Right? Like, he was the kind of like real foundation. He was the founder of the American Dental Association research arm. So he was a big figure in the early kind of 1900s, but his work's been lost. And this was kind of a big kind of awakening moment for myself in my career, where I hadn't heard of Price all through my 7 years of tertiary education.
Really?
But yeah, I stumbled across the book accidentally in Turkey when I was actually I was taking time off dentistry because I didn't know if I could do it anymore. I was, you're constantly fixing things. People are in pain. I didn't feel I was giving people good answers for their problems. And so I was in a traveler's hostel, and I picked it up off a shared reading shelf. And, because I just saw the DDS sign on it.
Oh my gosh.
And then I looked at it, I was like, what is this? And like, it's pictures, black and white pictures of faces of people all around the world. And it wasn't a language that I was really speaking or accustomed to at all. But I did have a previous, I was a biomed kind of minor. So I did have a history in kind of reading about this stuff and a real interest in our deep history. So it kind of struck a chord with me. But I looked at it and I just didn't understand it. So it was like, this is probably all kind of, disproven. But I put it in my bag and kind of, went back to it. And it's probably a couple of years later, I actually picked it up again, and I realized, because I see this in the practice all the time, where people's jaws are not growing anymore, and there's no answer for that in modern dental terminology. We don't talk about the etiology of malocclusion or crooked teeth. And this is what Price was talking about. He was just taking photos and going, hey, these people's craniofacial, forms, their jaws are growing correctly. And it's really important for their health. They don't get any other chronic diseases. And they do it by eating these traditional foods. And he compared populations across the continents that were eating the modern diet compared to these traditional diets. And he found that in one generation, the jaw, the teeth, the tooth decay would skyrocket up to modern rates at about 30%. And this all happened in one generation of eating the modern diet. And so his thing was like, right, so this is happening in my patients. But there seems to be this this pattern of human health that we've just lost. And so he measured what was in the food. And I think this is really where Price's stuff was kind of tragically lost, because he found some critical points of the human diet that we need to develop jaws and teeth. And it's so fundamental to our physiology. Not only do we prevent dental health, we prevent a whole other host of issues by getting these fat soluble vitamins. He identified A and D, and he wrote activator X in his work, but he died before he identified it. And a tragic thing, really, because it was kind of the keystone to the work, what would kind of show how the whole system and how it worked in the body too. So it was 70 years until Chris Masterjohn picked up that Activate X was actually vitamin K2. And vitamin K2 is a co-worker basically for vitamin D. It picks up calcium, it puts it into bones and teeth, it activates two proteins called osteocalcin and matrix GLA protein. And they're critical. And we didn't figure out what those proteins were doing until the probably 80s for osteocalcin and 90s for matrix GLA protein. So it's not built into our fundamental idea of what the body's doing. And so Price's work really required this scientific kind of decades of scientific research to back up his work. And then finally, in 2000, I think it was 11 or 12, when I was reading it, I could put it all together, which is why I wrote my book. And this is the tragic thing, is that Price is saying, hey, at the foundation of our of our health, which is our teeth and our jaws, we have this this fundamental connection to food. And all traditional societies made sure they ate these three nutrients, and food becomes very simple. It's animal based because these nutrients are converted biologically in the animal form. You don't get it in plant forms because they have these precursors that must be converted in animals. And you have to prepare them in a certain way, and you have to honor the animal's life in a certain way. And without it, our health suffers remarkably. In particular interest, the degeneration of the growth of the jaw, which we don't talk about much today. We just put braces on kids, but there is a cause for that, and it's eating the wrong diet. It's nutrient deficiency that causes an ongoing problem of chronic disease.
It's such a fascinating story, and I love how it ties it all together. And I love when we see commonalities across dentistry and medicine, because it really starts to point. If you point enough fingers in the same direction, it's like, this is the truth. And I think you're right. You're absolutely right. I agree with everything you said. And Weston Price was really at the core of the truth. And how ironic that we began this conversation with the discussion of Marilyn Monroe versus Kim Kardashian. And I respect everybody's ability to choose their diet, but Weston Price knew it. These indigenous cultures knew it. The hunter-gatherers throughout Africa, throughout Northern Europe, he went all over the world. They knew that these foods were critical for, like you say, proper mandible and maxilla development. And if we don't develop the mandible and the maximal properly, which we'll talk about more, kids need braces. And there's an epidemic of braces. I had braces as a kid. I want to talk about wisdom teeth as well. But before we dive into that, I want to show some photos. I pulled up a PDF of Weston Price's Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. But let's just make sure that everybody understands this. Where are these nutrients found? So when we're talking about animal foods, where do we get vitamin A and the retinoic acid form, which is the bioavailable form? And where do we get this full spectrum of vitamin K2 menaquinones? It's important that people understand vitamin K2 is not just one thing. It's many different things. It's a full spectrum of menaquinones. Where are these found in animal foods?
Yeah, so Price identified that it's only a very small amount of foods that really store these in a high form that the body absorbs well. You mentioned that retinoic acid. So in people think of vitamin A, for instance, as being kind of colorful orange vegetables, but that's a beta carotene which must be converted, and some people are genetically very poor converters of this, and so you will not get a lot of the active form of vitamin A from your colorful, orange or kind of red vegetables. So you actually find these in the organs of animals, and so in particular liver, and so beef liver and lamb liver and so forth. These are the most kind of nutrient dense forms. So cod liver oil, which was a tradition for probably 2 generations ago, you give cod liver oil to your kids because it's the most bioactive form of vitamin A, and it also couples with vitamin D. And so fat soluble vitamins seem to be carried in the plant world in this precursor form. So for vitamin D, you find it in mushrooms, but that's D2, and D2 competes with D3 in the body. Has to be converted. It's not the most active form. So D3 you absorb through sunlight, but you can also get it from these food sources like liver, eggs, grass-raised dairy. So these are the foods that have these are the foods that Price identified, and they couple. So A and D couple together, so they create a need for each other in the body. But then the trilogy, which is what Price wrote about, he didn't know the nutrients. So tragic. But K2 kind of brings it all together, and so K2 activates those proteins we talked about, which picks up calcium. So vitamin D helps the body to absorb calcium, which you won't absorb any calcium if you're vitamin D deficient, which many people are today, and you'll only absorb 15% of the calcium. And then what your body does is the vitamin A is kind of the turnover guy. It activates all the cells that use and get the body ready to use calcium. And then K2 brings the calcium in, and it's this amazing trilogy that you really need from these treasured foods. And if Price looked at these cultures, every culture around the world, if you look at your heritage, you'll find meals that are based in these kind of organs, bones and bone marrow, where the body stores these nutrients. And in the human body, your liver manages all this, with our triglycerides and so forth. All of that is managed in the liver, and that's why in an animal, in the same way, you eat it and you get the full spectrum of these nutrients.
It makes so much sense, right? This is why I believe so strongly in eating nose to tail, why I built Heart and Soil, why we make desiccated organ supplements if people can't get fresh organs. And I'll tell you, everybody watching this knows this is not the usual background for me. I'm sitting in a hotel in Virginia and I'm flying to Tanzania tomorrow. And the hilarity is that I have a small jar, and into that small jar, I'm going to place fresh liver. So we'll see if the TSA lets me bring in raw liver onto the plane, because I'm bringing a bunch of desiccated organ supplements from Heart and Soil, but I want to bring some fresh liver as well, at least for the first few days, because I know that this is a key thing. Like, I want to get liver as much as I can in my diet. I want to get the other organs as much as I can in my diet. And the whole reason that I'm going to Tanzania to live, or to really hunt and spend time with the Hadza and the Maasai and probably the Chaga and the Datoga, is just to see this in practice. Everybody says they do this. Everybody I know who's been to Africa says this, but I know they eat nose to tail. And I want to ask them, do you think about the liver? Do you prize the liver in the same way? Which foods do you eat? But when you just eat nose to tail, it all works out in such a beautiful way, but we don't even think about organs anymore today. We go to the grocery store and it's all muscle meat. I went to Whole Foods today and, I was amazed that they had liver, but it wasn't out anywhere. I had to ask the guy behind the counter, do you guys have liver? And he said, well, let me go see. And it's like, he's looking in the freezer section and under some stuff. He's like, no, maybe I have it in the back. And he comes out and he had a pound of beef liver for me, which was grass-fed. And I did the happy dance. But how is anyone supposed to know about this? You have to go ask the guy. He's looking in the freezer in the back of the refrigerator. So these foods are not a part of our diets, but they're critical because of these fat-soluble vitamins that play so many interconnected roles in the human body.
We've completely lost this way of eating. It's tragic, and it is really difficult to integrate these organs into your diet now. One, because you're not accustomed to eating it, so it's kind of like you have to kind of get used to that again. I enjoy it now, but it's still kind of a strange taste. So you kind of have to understand that you've been brought up in this diet that is completely devoid of these types of foods. And then two, you just can't find them anywhere. Butchers barely stock these organs anymore because people don't buy them, and it's crazy. And when you think about the dollar to nutrient ratio, you are getting so much bang for your buck when if you get a pound of liver. And I love the desiccated supplements too. It brings it all kind of into an easy form, for people that are busy, or even, there are some people that are conscious about their health and they just won't they won't go and cook a liver or a hearts or kidneys or something. And I think for that, desiccated supplements are a great option for that too. But interesting, Paul, the Maasai, you might see the practice where, because one of their techniques, because they're out in the Tanzanian desert, is to use a very targeted bow and arrow to shoot their calves in the neck and drink the blood. And that was one of their main sources that Price noted for fat soluble vitamins, is to drink the blood directly raw out of the neck. So I'd be interested to see you experience that.
I hope I get to do it. I want to drink blood, and anyone who follows me knows that I've done it before. Although I've had friends tell me, when you drank the blood, I'm pretty sure you lost some followers, Paul. But I said, I don't care. I want to drink the blood. And if the Maasai hand me a mug of curdled fermented milk with blood, I will drink it, and you guys will get video of it. So stay tuned for Paul's blood and milk mustache.
I'll be watching. Yeah,
yeah, it's gonna happen soon. It's gonna happen soon. Awesome. I've got a screen share. I want to show this. So, I imagine that this is I don't even know if this is a licensed PDF of nutrition and physical degeneration, but I'm just showing a screenshot of the Kikuyus versus the Maasai. And this is an amazing contrast that Price talks about in his book. And the Maasai are people who are much taller and much stronger. And the Maasai are animal-based, and the Kikuyu have many more plants in their diet, and they basically live in the same region of Africa. But you can see here, these are children and adults in Africa with basically perfect freaking teeth. This gentleman on the lower right, he notes, has had his teeth whittled down as a sort of a cultural thing. The Wakamba tribe points the teeth. It does not cause tooth decay, and while they live on their normal native food. So this guy has still normal, amazing teeth that have been made into daggers. But everybody else here has amazing teeth. And this book is full of pictures of this. Look at these perfect, and you can speak to this better than I can, dental arches, the maxilla, the mandible, these big smiles, these evenly spaced teeth. None of these people have had braces. None of them lost their wisdom teeth. And then he contrasts it with these African tribesmen who have been westernized. And here we see them with loss of teeth everywhere as they lose their traditional diets. And he says they were provided with imported foods, white flour, sugar, polished rice, and canned goods. Tooth decay became rampant. I'll just add that basically if you combine white flour, sugar, polished rice, and canned goods, you get Beyond Meat. So we know what Kim Kardashian's teeth are going to look like soon enough. But this is just the pictures that I wanted to show here. And I imagine this is the type of thing that you've seen in your diet and in your practice as well. Have you seen these changes? Have you seen people in your practice who eat traditional foods or who do get liver and the quality of their teeth versus the majority of people you see? Have you seen this contrast?
The tragic thing is that you got to, so Price is observing this in the 20s and 30s. And so since then, the modern diet has been ramped up, and it's ramped up again. You're talking about Beyond Meat and this, these meat replacements. But, from the 50s to 60s to, we were seeing, refined sugar and, refined, things like cereals become so staple in the diet that this has become normal. And so in children today, you just don't see any jaws that are even kind of close to developing, to be able to fit 32 human teeth. And, the good thing is, if you, with a functional kind of practitioner, you can actually change this. You can guide the growth of the jaw, which is really crucial because there's a physical aspect to it. But you do see, I'm based on the East Coast of Australia. You do see, people that grew up in a farming kind of background, that they have this kind of more traditional jaws. So there was a guy, he was probably about 70, farmer that came in to me, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and he had a wisdom tooth that had a filling on it. It was hurting him, and he didn't want to have a root canal or anything like that. He wanted to have it out. And I looked at this guy. He had like a bowling ball for a head, and I remember going to, because wisdom teeth are kind of right at the back of the lower wisdom teeth, right at the back of the angle of the mandible. you normally kind of have to really pull the cheek out to kind of get that. So his jaw went so far back, my tools barely would reach them because his jaw was so big. And so like we had tools that weren't even designed to kind of deal with this guy's jaw. And then so the tooth was fully erupted, but the cortical bone around the tooth was so thick. I had to drill it was a terrible appointment. It was probably for an hour to get this tooth free because it was so embedded in this thick bone. Now, when I look at the angles of the mandible of younger, kind of adolescents who have impacted wisdom teeth, the bone is thin. It's like paper, and so it's kind of just like you can flick it and it'll just come off. Whereas this guy had this thick bone. You just don't see that anymore. And it's one of the most fundamental aspects of our physiology to be able to place calcium into bones and teeth. We see it as osteoporosis later in life. We know that's at almost epidemic levels. But the first signs are in our teeth. And what happens is that, so if you saw in those pictures, how he got them to look up and kind of show their dental arch. So they were showing the maxillary width. And so the roof of the mouth is the floor of the nasal sinus. Now, I was never taught this it's absolute straight common sense, but I was never taught that in dental school. And so what happens is when you have a narrow maxilla, so you've crooked upper teeth, you have a narrow maxilla, and what it does is it restricts the volume of the nasal sinus. And so it's difficult for you to breathe through the nose, and a lot of kids will breathe through the mouth. It deforms the maxilla further because you don't get the airflow through the nose, which expands the bone. And then what happens is that it's very difficult to breathe through the nose. You won't do it at night. And then the whole craniofacial form will start to collapse. And that's when you have these crooked arches, these maxillas that sit back. So we don't have the kind of forward profile anymore. And it really flows onto this terrible kind of, so Price actually recorded it via looking at the anthropological records in each area. He would find the skulls of their ancestors, and you actually look at any anthropological record, and this kind of development doesn't happen in human history. We're really at the point now where it's incredibly important that we change this, because the consequences are potentially dire if we don't develop the airways, if we don't develop a stable skeletal system that supports a neural system, then it completely pushes our physiology towards something that is chronically sick. And that's what Price was showing, that those pictures, you see those rotten teeth. Now, those men, if they had modern dental care, you would probably see like a fixed up set of teeth, right? So that's what's happening today, is that most people have kind of, they'll have restorations or they'll have orthodontics, but it's kind of masking over this, because we've got very good dental treatment now, but it's masking over this root cause, which is malnutrition. That's malnutrition.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I'm sure that's what Kim Kardashian will get to cover it up. But if she were living in Africa, we would know. So let's just make this point very clear for the listener. Losing your wisdom teeth is not normal for humans. We're not meant to lose our wisdom teeth. Our ancestors had jaws that were big enough to hold their wisdom teeth, right?
Absolutely. And so, Darwin was one of the first to record. I think he was his oral surgeon that noted. He said, modern people are not growing jaws that fit wisdom teeth. Whereas you look back in the anthropological records, you find people with fully erupted wisdom teeth, but you find cortical bone behind that tooth. So you'll see space where the bone is, where the tooth is erupted, and the space behind. Now, in an impacted wisdom tooth, what happens is there's not enough space, and it'll actually kind of jam up against the tooth in front, or sometimes they'll be pointing backwards, or sometimes they're kind of stuck right down in the bone. Now, that's purely a lack of space, and it's the lack of resources. So when the jaw is growing, the body is using resources. It's using hormonal signals. It's using all these fat-soluble vitamins we talked about, and minerals, and it's mineralizing bone. If the growth signals aren't there, and kind of a really good example of that is, testosterone is a big director of that. And we know that testosterone can change the shape of the jaws, for instance. But so if all those signals aren't there, which all these fat soluble vitamins are underlying for, you don't get this big, wide, hard mineralized cortical bone that then supports the teeth. And what happens is that when you're developing, the teeth buds will pop up as you're kind of getting older, around 12, 13, your wisdom teeth buds will form in the bone, and if you don't have enough space, sometimes the bud won't even form. So I didn't have my two lower wisdom teeth because my jaw wasn't developed enough to kind of it just pushed on the bud and never existed. So that happens very commonly in people as well. And people say, "Oh, we're evolving away from our wisdom teeth." It's like, no, this isn't an evolution. That's not that's not the answer here, because you see the flow-on effect of losing this jawbone, and you don't see it. There's been a study that looked at the morphology changes in jaws, modern jaws, compared to ones that were happening. So, for instance, between species anthropologically, and you don't. It's a very different type of change. Like the geometry is completely different. It doesn't happen in this very swift form that you see that Price was recording back in the 1920s. So it's wisdom teeth impactions. Unfortunately, today it's a reality that some people need to have their teeth out because you get infections when they're stuck there. But what we really need to be doing is guiding our next generation so they eat the foods that grow their jaws and to functionally breathe through the nose properly, so that their craniofacial form, by the time they're 17, 18, their wisdom teeth are nice and straight and they're coming in without any problems with space.
I have a sister and she has a daughter and a son, and I need to tell her this when I see her today. I am saving her thousands of dollars in braces for her kids by convincing her to feed them desiccated organ supplements, liver, these organs, because this is an investment, and it has to do with probably the health of the mother when the baby's in utero, and then the health of the development when the kids are young. But I really think that parents should invest. If you want to save money on your kids' braces, take that money and buy liver. And it's $5 a pound. You'll have extra money left over for trips to Disneyland or Aruba or wherever you want to go. But you parents out there, anyone listening who wants to conceive, I really think this is the information. This is why I do this, to get this information to expectant moms, expectant dads, so that moms can get these foods in pregnancy and then feed them to their kids when they're young and babies. And, I think liver is a great first food for your child. And you don't have to do a ton, even half an ounce a day, or desiccated organ supplements, just opening it on their food works great. And then they'll get this vitamin A, they'll get vitamin K2, and they'll get vitamin D, hopefully in the sun. And then guess what? You won't have to pay for your kids' braces. The maxilla will be well formed. They'll breathe better. And there's been so much discussion now of breathing with James Nestor's book, and this idea that we're not breathing enough in our nose, and it's all connected with these fat-soluble vitamins. And that is the point that I think he left out of that book. I skimmed his book, and there really wasn't a whole lot of discussion of nutrition. And I thought he's left out the key piece that, yes, we need to breathe through our nose to make sure that we form it, but we need to get the nutrition to form the nasal passages. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. I spoke to James early in his book process, and I kind of showed him the whole pricing, and, the breathing. So there's two trains of thought actually in the orthodontic community. Have you heard of Mike Mew?
No.
So Mike Mewes is a guy, his dad was actually an oral surgeon that talked about this jaw growth, and he said there's all these functional factors, the tongue, nasal breathing, that actually contribute to how a child's jaw grows, and that actually it's a functional issue with low tongue posture, mouth breathing, so forth. And he's got a huge YouTube channel actually where he does tongue exercises. It's called Myofunctional Therapy now, and what a lot of young teenagers are taking on to get kind of chiseled jaws. It's interesting. But so what their kind of view is that it's purely a physical problem, is that you're breathing through the mouth, you fix it all, and then that will change the bones. And that's true to an extent. It fixes the posture of the jaw, which helps the growth of the jaw, but the root cause is the lack of nutrients. And so you have to kind of go back to Price's work to see that, well, actually, this was happening as we were going off the diet. So why did it ever happen in the first place? Is because the nutrients weren't there to give the growth signals for this jaw to grow in the first place. And I completely agree that I think for James, he was trying to focus on breathing. I think it was probably a bridge too far for him, and he really kind of nailed that idea of nasal, and, he's got a lot of people mouth taping at night, which is great, but it goes it's so much bigger in that I couldn't agree more with the statement that parents should be thinking about giving liver to their kids. I've got 2 kids now, one on the way, and got a 2.5-year-old. He has cod liver oil in his milk every morning, and they have desiccated chicken livers, and we cook kind of beef liver. We hide it. He's probably. Yeah, because they're kids are picky. It's difficult. Parents say they won't eat it, but you can do it. You can put it in a sauce. You can there's lots of ways to kind of cook it into something and it's just so important. You can nearly forget about anything else. You give your kids liver, and they're going to be healthy. And one of the things that Price noted was that traditional cultures would make sure that a couple that were looking to conceive would eat these nutrients 6 to 12 months before actually conceiving a baby. And I think this is a really critical point, is that the mother has to be stocked up in these nutrients, because we find vitamin D deficiency, for instance, is known to be transferred from mother to child. And if a mother is vitamin D deficient on conception, this is transferred to the very, very critical first weeks of a developing fetus. And so you really have to have that stacked up, because the important thing about vitamin D is it speaks to our genes. There's 30,000 gene receptors throughout the body, and so they're all listening to how much sunlight vitamin D is around. And without that, we seem to have these epigenetic changes. And so there's a couple of orthodontists and pediatric dentists at Penn State University that look anthropologically at newborn children that didn't make it, and that we find much more developed jaws in babies. And so if you see today, like the very underdeveloped mandible of a newborn, that's not how a child should be. It should be much more forward. And a lot of kids have a lot of breathing issues to start with because their mandibles are set back. You see the very underdeveloped chins. That seems to be, it's a growth signal in the womb, and we're not getting these nutrients and that are absolutely critical to the mother. And the flow-on effect really happens before you conceived, which is pretty. There's a lot of changes that we need to make to be able to do this. And just for an example, I see a lot of parents now that do this, right? And they still have kids with some dental issues and the small jaw. And they're like, we've done this. And, I kind of have to, one, that, there are ways we can fix this. But the unfortunate thing is it's a generational problem that we're going to have to do a lot of work on. And we need to eat a lot of liver and a lot of, broths and these kind of foods in order to heal our generations. And, it's pretty important to think that, it takes, what you're doing now to kind of reshape your grandchildren's jaws.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of my niece and the children that she will have. And if we are able to instill good dietary practices in her and get her eating liver or help her understand this, then the children she will have will benefit. My sister probably didn't eat enough liver in pregnancy. I don't think she ate any, but doesn't mean I didn't try. And it's just this, like you said, it's a generational thing. If you want your children's children to be good, educate them. And I'm so struck as you're telling these stories by your recounting of finding Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, this book from Weston Price, in a hostel. I just can't believe this wasn't taught in dental school, Stephen. I mean, at what point, and you said that you almost left dentistry because you were so disillusioned. And that was really where I was in my medical career as well. People who know my story will know that I was a physician assistant in cardiology, and I was disillusioned. Despite the fact that I worked with very well-meaning and intelligent physicians, I was very disillusioned with what I was doing, exactly the same as you, seeing people not correcting the root cause. I went back to medical school and then to residency. And thankfully, I discovered these ideas kind of in my residency because I really wasn't satisfied. So at what point was that was really the point? So you went through all of dental school and then you got disillusioned? I mean, when did you have the light bulb? Was it actually in the hostel at that point?
Well, it was a little, I didn't really realize straight away because I saw it and it wasn't really the language I'd been taught. I was like, well, I've got a dental degree now. Obviously this information is outdated now. But then when I saw that there was kind of information in Price's work that was things that I hadn't been taught, it kind of dawned on me I didn't understand it. And then it kind of dawned on me later that the whole kind of dental industry don't understand either. And they're same as you, there are very well-meaning, kind of very intelligent people that that kind of shape how the education is formed, but there's no look at how this core nutrition and anthropology, like dental, like all our human history is kind of recorded in our teeth. Like you find the oldest human records is in jawbones and teeth because it's one of the most the dense bone formation, and it's stored. And so anthropology, we learn about our ancient past from their teeth, and so it's that important that we understand what the anthropological norm is for teeth, that and we shape our treatment of that. And the problem there is, it's very similar to medicine in that, dentistry has been very focused on treatment, and so there's lots of great treatments out there, but we need to categorize that as it is. It's a reactive solution to an underlying problem. And it's kind of like the fable of the fox, and the fox is walking through a forest, and he sees a lovely bunch of grapes up on a high branch. He goes, "Oh, those grapes look amazing. I want to eat them." And he looks up and he tries to climb, and he can't get up. It's too high. And he says, "Oh, look, they're probably sour anyway." And I would say that the medical and dental industry is the fox, right? We've forgotten that we were actually trying to find the cause of all this and find the solution, and we've just been kind of veneering over the problem, which is very kind of very indicative of what the dental industry has been doing. So it's quite easy to kind of categorize these kind of things. If you're getting a dental crown, or if you need a root canal treatment, or you need a tooth taken out, that kind of thing, that is a reactive solution. And there are many great physicians out there that can do that, but ultimately you want to be finding the root cause of it. And this is where functional medicine sits nicely with this, these principles of finding why diseases happen. And oral disease, the one big thing I think we need to go through is to integrate the whole thing. Is why you and people like us haven't talked before is because dental and medical is so separated. And it's crazy because we've basically gone through the same kind of story, except through different paths. It needs to be put together, and then it all kind of comes together nicely. We have a full picture. We can help a child grow and develop through their formative years. The issue with kids now, when they have these little jaws, they suffer from breathing issues at night, and it affects their neural development. And so ADHD, autism, these issues often have underlying root causes in breathing problems, which then goes back to the problems of nutrients. And then you've got this whole set of issues now that are very difficult to kind of untie unless you understand what's really happening.
And I love that you made this point about the sour grapes and the fox, because I've heard this subtly communicated on podcasts from other well-known physicians in the space. And I heard one podcast where this physician was talking to Gerald Schulman about insulin resistance and about what causes it. And Gerald Schulman was talking about free fatty acids in the blood, and he says, patients won't do dietary change. And it was just like, that's the exact thing. That's the sour grapes, And I've heard that said so many times in medicine. It's like our excuse in Western medicine is patients won't change their diet, so we're not even going to look for the root cause. Even if it was related to diet, patients won't do it. Sour grapes. Those grapes are probably sour anyway. So they've used this as this subtle excuse, and we don't even do it. And that gets communicated to medical students, and that gets communicated to residents. And so it's just this sort of, it's this very vicious cycle of residents and medical students, and then attending physicians and board certified physicians thinking, I've always been told by everyone that patients won't make dietary change, so it doesn't even matter. So the only thing I've got is medications. And what's funny is my dad is an internist, and he's retired now, but he used to tell me the same thing when I was growing up. Patients won't make dietary change. And I saw that a little bit when I was a physician assistant working in cardiology, but it was just that I wasn't talking to the right patients. Later on in my practice, when I said, hey, this is the type of medicine that I do root cause medicine, I do functional medicine, for lack of a better term, I do nutritional medicine, the patients who were willing to make those changes found me. It's almost like when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and it's funny because if you just try and go out and proselytize all your patients and say, you should make dietary change, they won't find it. They won't be ready to do it. But there are literally millions, if not hundreds of millions of people out of the 7 billion people in the world who are looking for this information and are not finding it. And they want to make change because they're so fed up with this. And it's so frustrating to me that Western medicine is just sour grapes and says, they won't make dietary change anyway. My really deep hope is that the first thing that physicians begin to say in the future, that's my goal, for all of my work, is that to change the medical paradigm in a big way, so that anytime anybody comes to the doctor and it's whatever condition, ulcerative colitis, Sjogren's, dental issues, autoimmune thyroiditis, eczema like I had, psoriasis, any condition, they say, you should change your diet. You should change your diet. You should eat like your ancestors, because we know this is the answer. And we're fighting against so many pieces of misinformation about meat being bad for humans, but this is clearly the answer. There are so many things that point to this now, that my goal is literally to change the medical system and to have that fox say, those grapes are worth getting, and figure out some way to go up the tree. And these doctors lose their limited ideology. It's crazy. So I want to ask you about some interesting stuff around fruit and sugar and fructose, because I've seen you post on Instagram about this. I think it's really fascinating. As I'm thinking about these indigenous cultures, I'm going to visit the Hadza. I'm reading, about them. There's a great book by Frank Marlowe that's actually right here that I've been reading, and you can read these papers and stuff. And one of the foods that they treasure is honey. And they also treasure berries. And these are both high in fructose. I mean, they have some amount of glucose, but also fructose. And so I guess the question is, does sugar cause tooth decay? And let's walk us through that. Let's really talk about that, and then segue to the question of what does cause tooth decay. It's kind of a complex process from what I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So the dental industry has been ahead of the curve in that, through the 70s, they were kind of saying, hey, sugar is bad for you. You probably shouldn't eat so much but the only thing they said was that, well, it rots your teeth. And so the cause of that is left at, well, the sugar is fermented by certain bacteria in the mouth, strep mutans in particular, that releases an acid and that breaks down the tooth. And that's it. And so that's a very, very superficial look at what's happening, because there's in the mouth, since 2008, we know that there are billions upon billions of bacteria living in the mouth. And this one set of, a couple of set of, microbes that we find that cause decay, it's a whole ecosystem that has gone out. And so it's a very superficial way to kind of look at, sugar causes cavities because of this one set of bacteria. What actually happens is that there's a whole ecology in the oral microbiome, and when you put sugar in, it feeds the fast metabolizing groups of bacteria. And what happens is that eventually they'll start to take the resources, and they'll start to grow, and they'll start to overpower the other forms. When you look at the metabolome and the research that sees all the different changes that happens when you put different inputs into the mouth, you see complete changes. And so when you start to introduce these, a simple sugar to the mouth, this will happen once, they'll release a bit of acid, but the ecology will actually respond to it. And it'll actually, the thing that it does is releases calcium, because the microbes live on plaque in teeth. And so it creates like a biofilm with calcium and minerals for it to live, because that's why you get plaque buildup on your teeth, is because you need bacteria there. And it's actually exchanging calcium with saliva, and it's using calcium, to build plaque on the teeth. And then it's actually exchanging calcium with the tooth. Tooth enamel mineralizes and demineralizes over time. And so what happens is when you have these acid formations, you'll have a release of calcium because of the decrease in pH. So when you lose the diversity of the oral microbiome, which is what anthropological studies find, when you take a bit of calcified plaque off of an old jaw, you find a very diverse set of bacteria. It's the same as in gut microbiomes when you go out. Well, yeah, like when you measure the gut microbiome of the Hadza or Maasai or South American tribes, you find this very diverse set of microbes. And this is speaking to a microbiome population that is balanced. It can, it does have its fast metabolizing bugs, but it also has its microbes that will kind of offset that. And so what we have today is a very undiverse microbiome compared to what before. So we're very susceptible to this sugar. So, when you think about kind of tribes that, honey and, berries, for instance, you don't get that all that often in nature. You don't find it's something that you come across here and there. So these kind of foods were relatively rare, but the people could eat them because they had these diverse microbiomes, and it didn't really affect them metabolically. And the other thing about raw honey too is it's one of the richest sources of certain lactobacillus species. So there's a whole microbiome there
in honey.
Yeah, and honey, yeah, totally. It's like, so until it's processed. Once you process, you lose all those microbes.
Right.
So you've got this rich, sugar source, but also too, it's delivered with microbes. Same as raw milk. When you pasteurize milk, you lose all these bacteria that take away that the ability to be able to metabolize the lactose and casein proteins and so forth, which is why probably a lot of people have a lot of issues with milk as well. So there's a very so it's not just sugar, it's this whole context of what we how we metabolize it, how we introduce these bacteria. So ferments, lacto-fermented foods, I think, introduce a really good set of these bugs. Meats, fermented meats too, these introduce good bugs as well. The other set of it is that teeth actually have an immune system. So they have cells called odontoblasts, which are very similar to osteoblasts and so forth that make bone. And they sit at the junction of the dental pulp and the dentine. They're kind of sitting there monitoring what's happening, because teeth are like, it's like this big kind of, they're called tubules, and it's like this. And so what happens is that there's fluid running up and down the inside of your teeth, and that's when you get a rush of kind of pain. Is you get a rush of fluid that kind of that hits the nerve. And so what these odontoblasts are doing is that they're monitoring the bacteria set around the dentine tubules and the enamel rods. And so what happens is when you get certain bacteria kind of coming in, it will actually send out an immune response. And this immune response is run by these three nutrients, A, D, and K2. So when you're deficient in A, D, and K2, you don't have this immune response. And then you start to get this breakdown of this calcium when you're introducing these high carbohydrate foods. So it's this really complex set of problems. And that's why Price found that in people with eating a traditional diet, is that they'll have green plaque all over their teeth, but they didn't have any tooth decay. It's because they're completely immune to decay. And and oral hygiene was kind of introduced in the 30s and 40s, and we haven't been doing this very long. And it's a very superficial approach. And I'm not saying people shouldn't brush their teeth, but you should be thinking about how your body is actually kind of naturally designed to defend this.
And I just showed this picture. I'll show it again. I was looking for odontoblasts. This is certainly not something that I learned in medical school. So you're teaching me, and I'm seeing here the dentin, the enamel, the odontoblasts, and the pulp, also ameloblasts and predentin. But this is the immune system, or pieces of the immune system that you're describing here, right? And this is the immune system that will respond properly when we have the fat soluble vitamins. Am I understanding this properly?
Exactly. So the dental pulp is like a blood supply. So the chylomicrons carry up all the fat soluble vitamins to the odontoblasts. Odontoblasts have VDR receptors, have vitamin D receptors on them, A receptors as well. They release proteins that are K2 activated. So it's this real kind of trilogy. So when you're deficient in D, your odontoblasts will kind of shrivel and you won't have that response. So this is the internal kind of immunity that we have to decay if you eat the right things. So you eat organs, and you're going to be immune to decay no matter what.
That's so fascinating, because you always think this, like, I don't think the Hadza brush their teeth. I mean, I don't think they floss. And I love this idea that if we are eating adequate fat soluble vitamins, there is a built-in defense mechanism in our teeth. This is not saying we shouldn't floss, that we shouldn't brush our teeth, probably because, I personally don't want green slime on my teeth. It's going to make it hard to walk to the grocery store. Everybody's going to look at me strangely wherever I go, but they don't have decay because there is this innate immune system, or this is probably an adaptive immune system in the teeth. And the story that I always think of is my own. It's that when I was a raw vegan for 7 months, I went to the dentist and they were like, "You have 7 cavities." And I thought, how can I have 7 cavities? I'm eating the healthiest diet in the world. And they said, "We want to fill these cavities." And I said, no, I don't want you to fill these cavities. And I shortly after that, I stopped being a vegan. I started eating meat again, and I never had problems. And that's the other point that I learned, is that the enamel can be eroded and then can grow back. And that the teeth are living. This is a living structure in your mouth. I think we think of them as rocks in your mouth, but as you're describing, there are immune cells, there's a blood supply, there's chylomicrons coming in the pulp, which are the same as the chylomicrons that are circulating through your bloodstream when the gut, is creating those chylomicrons, and they're being full of triglycerides from your diet. And so those triglycerides, like you said, are carrying or at least packaged with some of these fat soluble vitamins. So to think of your teeth as living, and then to think of the fact that all of these living structures in your mouth are so much more able to deal with issues when you have fat soluble vitamins, it really starts to, as you said, kind of elaborate upon this idea of tooth decay. It's not as simple as sugar causes tooth decay. If you don't have an immune system, then if you don't have an immune system in your teeth, if your odontoblasts are not adequate, then sugar is going to worsen your tooth decay. But I mean, the Hads and these other cultures seem to demonstrate just fine teeth eating this occasionally, not at the exclusion of other meats and stuff. Would you agree with all that?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the ancestral diet says it pretty simply. Like it's a range of kind of well raised nose to tail meats with lots of broths. So an important part is kind of breaking down the collagen, which we just don't talk about in the modern diet at all, which is the foundations. It gives you the amino acids for both bone structure, dentin, gums. All of that is treasured in the traditional diet, and they top it off with fermented foods, and some seasonal vegetables. That's kind of like what most traditional cultures do. It's that simple. And when you kind of put it in this perspective, you see how we've become this sick, because you think about Price's work was in the 20s and 30s. He died in 47. In the 50s, we started this diet heart hypothesis stuff where Keyes kind of talked about, and that's stripped out all the fat from our diet. So we're basically removing all the protective factors during the 60s, 70s, 80s. Then we start to put all the sugar in. So in the 80s, sugar really starts to step up in cereals. The refined vegetable oils are infiltrating everywhere. And then that's where we're at. That's why our systems don't work like this. Why we don't have immunity to tooth decay, and why our jaws aren't formed, because we don't have the hormonal signals, because all of our endocrine system is out, because we've been completely ignoring and not supporting it with these the nutrients that actually tell it what to do. That's one other thing, that vitamin D critical in the brain, with serotonin and melatonin to prime good sleep and bone formation. The modern diet is completely triggered towards chronic disease. And your story about veganism, I've seen that as well. So I see lesions kind of right down to the pulp in they've probably formed in a little bit over 12 months, and it's just
in vegans.
In vegans, it's it happens in other people too, but vegans particularly, they get this rampant decay because the body is deficient, it's screaming for nutrients, and you see it in the teeth first, and then the chronic autoimmune and other problems will follow.
And yet this is the diet that most of Hollywood, who are certainly not experts, but they set the tone, thinks is healthy. And we've been told, and I really love this picture that we're painting here, that we knew the answers, like humans. And I've talked about this with Chris Kenobi previously on the podcast, and this idea that in 1910, all of the fat we ate was animal fat. And we certainly had some carbohydrates, and people weren't getting probably as much liver as they should have been, but all the fat we were eating in 1910 was animal fat. And there were very low rates of heart disease and other issues and chronic disease and diabetes. And then we started introducing these seed oils. And then over time, thanks to the work of Ancel Keys, who probably was a very well-meaning guy, just very misled and very wrong, we have now vilified animal foods, and people are afraid of animal fat, which is also a good source of fat-soluble vitamins. They're afraid of red meat, and we don't even remember. We have a complete amnesia as to what animal organs are, because you go to the butcher and they're gone. So we're just a very nutrient-deficient culture, and that has led to many dentists being able to put their kids through college, which is a fantastic thing, but getting fillings. I mean, I had, mercury fillings when I was a kid, and that was a horrible thing, which we can talk about. And then I had braces when I was a kid. Thankfully, I kept my wisdom teeth, but I was a child of the same generation. The only real liver that I had as a kid was in liverwurst, which thankfully I ate, but that was the only thing I had. So that was probably where I was getting most of my vitamin A, my vitamin K2, and I somehow eked through. But it kind of brings me to my next question is, maybe the answer to this is no, but do you think that we can improve this as adults or teenagers? So what if somebody's listening to this and they're a 40-year-old man or woman is it worth incorporating these foods into our diet now? Is it possible to improve things in the near term now?
Absolutely. And so, I mean, I can be a testament to this. I was, I was kind of an athlete, up until my early 20s, and then kind of went into school. So I was always healthy, never really had a health issue. But kind of as I was getting to my early 30s, late 20s, I was finding that, I was just not, I was not sleeping very well. My wounds weren't healing very well. Like my skin just didn't feel like it was. And I was getting these sugar cravings at night. And so I was up at 2 or 3 o'clock eating these high, packet of chips and kind of like a high sugared yogurt or something, or chocolate, something like that, because I had these sugar cravings. And it just wasn't anything I'd really had. And I just wanted to eat late at night. And I felt terrible in the morning. And it was actually when it wasn't until I read Price's work that it flipped on me. It's like, hang on, so I can eat animal foods, which I love. I remember the time when my mum replaced butter with margarine in our fridge, and I was just like, this doesn't taste like anything. But then I thought, like, my brain was I was like, well, it's healthy, so I guess we got to do it like that. She replaced our whole milk with powdered skim milk. Like, tastes like nothing, tastes like water. And so there would have been nothing in those nutrients. And, I remember, I had acne as a kid. That was definitely due to the vegetables we used to eat, and high sugar too. But when I found that, so I was like, right, so I can eat butter and steak and eggs, and this is what I should be eating, and liver. And then all of a sudden, I started to sleep better. So I had my my week without sugar, in terms of absolute zero. And it was hard, but then I felt my endocrine system reset. I didn't have the cravings anymore. I started to sleep better. My wounds started to heal better, and my energy I felt so much clearer in the head. I can't recommend this anymore, because the thing is, dental issues are long lived. These things, they develop for years before they erupt. And so if you have an issue with teeth, you're probably going to have a problem that's going to need to be fixed or so forth. But if you keep going this route, you're going to get chronically ill. Like, there's no doubt about it. You will have, some form of degenerative, whether it's sleep issue, whether it's immune issue, metabolic issue. And now, the scary thing about this is that we've gone from heart disease to type 2 diabetes. Now we're in the sleep apnea epidemic. This is where people everywhere can't breathe at night because their jaws haven't grown. The next epidemic is Alzheimer's, which is 2040, 2050. And there aren't any epidemics after that. It's like, we're done if we don't work this out. And so I can't, to say to people more that, you need to change this now, and it's going to have benefits.
And there are 2 more things I want to ask you about before we wrap up. The first is bad breath. I know that this is not what people think it is. Bad breath is not too many bacteria in your mouth. But from your perspective as a dentist, what do you think is causing bad breath? Is mouthwash the answer? I don't think so. But I love that we talked about the oral microbiome and the importance of the diversity in the oral microbiome. But everyone listening to this knows it. You've been at the grocery store, you've been somewhere, and you can't even get 3 feet from somebody because they have such bad halitosis. And you think, man, that person needs to brush their teeth and use mouthwash, which is not the answer, I don't think. So from your perspective, what is causing such bad breath? Is it in the mouth, or is it somewhere deeper?
There can be multiple causes. So most bad breath will be from kind of an oral issue, like a deep kind of gum issue. And that's where you've got like a pocket or something that's like that. That's the most common cause. It's probably not one where you're getting that kind of, where you smell someone from that kind of range though. So you can get these kind of, you get gram negative, and they're anaerobic bacteria that kind of they build up in these pockets in the mouth. They're called periodontal disease. That's the most common cause. That can be a source. That's kind of the more superficial. That's the one that will kind of go from a good dental clean. But then we do gas tests in our clinic where we test the kind of bad breath. And actually there's quite a detailed speciality in South America where they do all these kind of testing for bad breath. But if you get certain type of hydrogen sulfide gases, it's probably coming from the nose. So people get post-nasal drip. That's a common cause. And so often you get these kind of hydrogen sulfide gases that are giving this bad breath off, but they'll have immaculate teeth, but they still get this bad breath. The other causes come from systemic, and these can be many. And so people kind of describe like a poo breath, and it's kind of tragic, but like it literally, some people get this, and it's tragic. I get a lot of people writing me about it. It's kind of a little bit sad, actually. You know, people have, because you imagine what it's like to have this smell, right? But the problem is that there's digestive issues. I think SIBO is a big problem with, and reflux with, gases that come from the small intestine. But then if you've got any kind of digestive issue where you're not fermenting or not kind of getting through, food properly, it's going to come up through a gas. So you can have any kind of digestive issue. And then there's liver or kidney issues that you can have kind of a sweet smell in the breath. There's kind of a fishy smell that can sometimes be a lung kind of issue. So it really is it can be a diagnostic tool for something going on, but yeah, it's not normal. And the other thing too is that a lot of people, if you're mouth breathing, you'll often dry out the oral area and in the throat and everything, and you'll get this kind of smell. So if you kind of lick your hand and leave it, you're going to smell it because it's dried out. So that's a very common cause, as well as people just mouth breathing. Yeah. So closing the mouth can help for a lot of people.
So it sounds to me like mouthwash is not the answer. If you have bad breath, you have to look more deeply. And in a previous podcast I did, periodontist even brought up the fact that mouth breathing is going to just destroy the oral microbiome and is actually going to inhibit many of the bacteria in the mouth that are involved in the formation of nitric oxide. So is mouthwash something you recommend, or is it just brushing your teeth with little roots and stems and leaves and shoots, like I'm going to do in Tanzania?
Tanzania, yeah. Yeah. So if we think about mouthwash, so most of the kind of supermarket or even prescribed mouthwashes are broad spectrum antibacterials. And so we've talked about the diversity of the microbiome. So if you introduce this to your mouth, you're going to kill, it's like a nuclear bomb into your oral microbiome. So while for bad breath, you might have, kind of an initial kind of benefit where it kind of smells fresh, but you're going to be destroying the ecology of your mouth. And it's not the solution, because the problem there. So in a small study, they've showed that people that use alcoholic mouthwashes can be at increased risk of diabetes because of the loss of diversity in the microbiome.
Wow.
And yeah. So like, but people that are constantly, and they've shown, certain precancers, lesions show up with alcoholic mouthwashes. So most of the antibacterials that go in the mouth, you shouldn't be using them daily. Sometimes they're good to treat a condition. You have an infection, you can use an antibacterial, something that will kind of get rid of it, and then you go on your way. But with oral hygiene, you should be looking to kind of remove any kind of gross plaque buildup, and then use a natural base. Nothing antibacterial.
I don't even use toothpaste. I just use a toothbrush. One of my patients actually told me about this toothbrush that's from boar's hair. And I think of myself as a very ancestral guy brushing my teeth with boar's hair. And apparently there are some plants that they use in Tanzania to like brush your teeth. And I'm going to try and get a video of that for you guys while I'm there. Yeah. So I used to have an issue with this many years ago. I would say maybe 20 years ago. I used to have bruxism. I used to grind my teeth so strongly at night, and now it's completely gone. Do you see this, and what do you think is behind bruxing, or this teeth clenching and grinding? Because I think this is a very fascinating piece of kind of anthropologic, or at least cohesive medical ideology as well.
Yeah, totally. So bruxism is really common. And so the most common cause is what's happening is it's a sympathetic drive from the brain, and what it's doing is pulling the jaw forward, and it's an airway response. So when your airway closes, your airway has pressure receptors. So what happens when you're sleeping is that if those pressure receptors go off, your brain gets a choking response. It's a sympathetic kind of survival response that you're being choked, and the brain will pull the jaw forward. That's the easiest way to open up the back of the airway here. And so the problem is that we don't have jaws that support it. So when you go to sleep, all the muscles relax and everything collapses, and then these pressure sensors go off. We don't have these big jaws that just hold open the airway anymore. But a big issue is that the other factor that goes on is tongue posture, because the tongue is an organ that slings to the base of the skull, right down to the hyoid bone here. And when the tongue is up, and it's kind of a movement like this, when the tongue is up like that, and that's where the back of it is, up to the soft palate, it's actually all of those muscles of the tongue, you look at the picture of it, and it's kind of open like this. So that's our posture. That's our rest posture, is tongue to the roof of the mouth and right to the back. It's a very difficult kind of movement to do. And we don't have this posture anymore. So we've got people that are kind of low tongue, and you'll see when you get crooked lower teeth, it's because of the tongue constantly hitting the lower teeth when you swallow. So people have a tongue thrust swallow. It's low tongue posture. It's not sealed to the roof of the mouth. They don't have a toned neck to support the airway during sleep, and their brain has to constantly pull the airway open during bruxing. That's the most common cause. In kids and sometimes adults, you can have parasites that can cause really kind of intense clenching, but for the most part, it's a breathing issue, and it's just this symptom of our unfortunately underdeveloped jaws.
Do you ever see like iron deficiency or vitamin D or magnesium? When I was looking on the internet many years ago, it seemed like some people were connecting nutrient deficiencies with bruxism as well. And certainly there have been so many changes in my life in those 20 years, but it's so interesting to me that I never clench. And for the longest time, I was on the verge of literally shattering my molars when I was clenching so much. And I think it may have been a nutrient thing as well. Have you seen anything about that?
I mean, I think anyone with the sleep issue is, and so what happens here is that you've got sleep apnea, which is like kind of like the really severe end where you're pausing and your brain is choking, right?
Right.
People with sleep apnea have a very high risk of vitamin D deficiency, and this kind of flows with B vitamins too. There's a whole range of things your body kind of depletes in when you have sleep issues. Now, people that brux, they often don't have sleep apnea, but they've got a condition called upper airway resistance syndrome. And this was identified at Stanford in the 90s. And what happened was that they found that people that didn't have, it was kind of a slim set of female patients that didn't have sleep apnea or snoring, but they were still having these kind of respiratory efforts at night. That's how you detect it on a sleep test. And what they found that by using a mandibular advancement splint, they would actually take away the symptoms. So you take away that. And so people have this it's kind of a silent sleep disorder, right? And it might be just clenching. It might be just it can be mouth breathing, like mouth breathing. You wake up with a dry mouth. But what will happen is that you'll have this nutrient deficiency as well. So I tell all my patients to get tested for their vitamin D to know your level, especially if there's a sleep issue. But you don't find many people that are adequate. And I'm not even sure these levels are adequate for where we should be. There was one study, there was a Russian study that showed that people taken off their ancestral diet dropped, I can't remember what the levels were, but they dropped from, I think it was up around 80 nanograms per milliliter down to around 40 or 50 just going off their ancestral diet.
And as we mentioned throughout the podcast, we can't really think about these fat-soluble vitamins in isolation. Vitamin A interacts with D, interacts with K, and also interacts with vitamin E. And the amazing thing is that if you eat an animal-based diet, you get all these things. Presumably, in order to procure that animal, you had to go into the wild and into the sun to go hunt the animal. So you're going to get either sunlight, or some foods do have vitamin D in them as well. And as we talked about earlier, that is cholecalciferol, that is vitamin D3, not ergocalciferol, which is vitamin D2 found in mushrooms, which is, again, a precursor form that doesn't really work that well in humans. And so these all need to be taken together. And that's why there's a popularity of vitamin D and K2 supplements now. Some supplements have even A, D, and K. But really what we should be doing is eating egg yolks, maybe fish eggs occasionally, liver, and getting in the real sun, because that's how we've always done it. But they all work together. And I love this, the example of those odontoblasts in the teeth, and how they're all signaled properly. Everything works when we get the right nutrients. Everything works when we eat a species appropriate diet, and everything falls apart when we don't. And we've heard so much about vitamin D in this COVID era. I actually just had COVID. It was very mild for me, thankfully. And I really believe that, as we've seen over and over now, but the media is really not talking about it a whole lot, vitamin D is so critical. So whether you're getting in real sunlight, which I think you and I would agree is the best thing for everyone, at least take a supplement of vitamin D, and make sure you're getting enough vitamin A and K2 as well. And then people always ask me about vitamin E on a carnivore diet. And every time I've checked myself or my patients, the vitamin E level is really high normal. So I think that there's just an inadequacy in the way the USDA and other agencies have tested vitamin E in animal fat. I'm sure that it is full of tocopherols of a full spectrum in animal fat, because I've never seen a client on an animal-based diet anywhere near low in at least normal vitamin E levels. That's just the last fat-soluble vitamin that I wanted to mention. But it's amazing how it all fits together. And I've seen this so often. And I love how it all points in the same direction. I don't know how anyone can argue for a plant-based diet. I don't know how anyone can argue against the benefits of meat and organs when we see benefits everywhere. Benefits in the maxilla, the teeth, the cavities, the breathing, the nasal passage, the mandible, benefits in terms of overall health and metabolic health. And I love that that's so interesting. You'll have to send me the study showing the mouthwash, lowering your oral microbiome diversity could probably decrease the diversity of your gut. And is that connected with an issue? It's so fascinating. It all just works when we do simple things like our ancestors have always done.
Totally. And one thing about this whole conversation is that, I do think that the mouth has been a bit left out. And there's so many kind of easy, low-hanging fruit there that we could just kind of, break through. Like, there's no argument about the type of diet that is better for your mouth. Unfortunately, hopefully how this vegan conversation kind of changes is that, the experience people have with their teeth, tells you that your body is not happy on this diet, and the nutrients that give you this immunity to tooth decay, a strong, healthy gums, and you can't get these nutrients without animal foods. And it really is kind of a reintroducing back to our roots, where this is where we came from. And, that's something I'm really passionate about, is that I really think we need to understand what humans were doing long in our past for a very long time that got us here. Because if we don't, it's very difficult to kind of navigate, where we're going for our future generations, because at the moment there's a lot of problems we need to solve. And, if we don't really get on top of it soon, like doing like the things that you're doing, this message, it can save a lot of people's, lives in many meaningful ways. And if we don't do it soon, I don't know, can we turn these problems? It's a big issue.
And this is what the remembering is all about, which is just the best phrase that I could come up with. Remembering how our ancestors ate and lived. We need to just remember this stuff. And I'll just add this, and then we'll wrap up. I saw on Instagram today, a guy was poking fun at this idea of sort of an ancestral diet. And he was saying, I think it's ridiculous when these people say, eat like your ancestors, and they eat cauliflower pizza and low carb beer. And I thought, well, that's a good example of this. Yeah, our ancestors didn't eat cauliflower pizza and low carb beer, and neither of us is advocating for that. But at a broader level, there are people who criticize this concept of ancestral health. And I think it's really ridiculous. And this vegan doctor chimed in the comments and said, eat like your ancestors who lived for 35 years. And it made me so frustrated, because that notion is so insidious and so wrong. And if you look at the hunter-gatherers, and hopefully I'll be able to document this with the Hadza, if you look at hunter-gatherers who are actually eating a traditional diet, who are able to hunt adequately enough like our true ancestors were, they are vital into old age, and they live as long as us. They have the same life expectancy as us, but they have a much longer health span. The notion that our ancestors lived to be 35 is completely false, and I just want to take the moment to again correct that. It is skewed by higher rates of infant mortality, which happen in the natural world. And there are so many examples of this squaring of the morbidity curve. I talked about it with James Clements on a previous podcast. I've talked about it repeatedly. If you guys hear this notion that your ancestors only lived to be 30 or 40, that's BS. Because if they lived past adulthood, or they lived into adulthood, if they didn't die from a snake bite when they were a kid, or the mother didn't die in childbirth, which happens in the wild sometimes, they lived to be vital and old until, their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we see that in these indigenous cultures, and that notion is so insidious, but we really do have to. I think it's so valuable to live like our ancestors, and I hate it when people parrot this incorrect notion. Have you heard that said? It gets me so riled up.
I mean, there's no argument in the dental route that, like, you just come at them with you look at the anthropology of their teeth. You can't argue the health there. Like, if you look at their maxillas and their mandibles, there's just no, you can't argue the dental part of it. Yeah. So that's kind of where I come at it from. Like something that I thought, there's a lot of records of humans living for very long times as well. I think that the 80 to 100 years that we kind of see is potentially not the total capacity of what we could be living. There's a lot of records saying that humans lived a lot longer than that. So I don't know. I think there's a lot more capacity we can do here, and we really need to get the basics right, which is eating these nutrients that come from well-raised animals. And I think there's a lot more that we can be doing in this conversation, and it's critically important too.
Yeah. So I just want to show everybody, this is your book, The Dental Diet. It's amazing. I would recommend everybody check it out. It's kind of a summary of all the things we've talked about today. But if you know someone in your life who has bad teeth, they need to read this book, and maybe the Carnivore Code as well. So thanks for coming on the podcast. My last question to everyone is, what is the most radical thing that you have done recently, my friend? And I'm using the word radical, kind of like 80s radical, cool. It's the most radical thing you've done recently.
I've done a lot of radical things lately. Okay, what have I done recently? I was in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber on the weekend, and also I did a shiatsu massage treatment. Have you had that before?
I've never had a shiatsu massage. No.
They're amazing. They do movement, and because I'm going through I'm trying to do a lot of kind of flexibility and fascia and yoga work, which is hard when you've kind of done kind of a lot of weight-based stuff for a long time. So I'm going through a journey of that. And so I found a shiatsu message where they actually look at how the different muscles connect to organs and so forth with Chinese medicine. Really interesting. And, I'm really interested in that area, but that was a great experience. Anyone with kind of neck pain or anything, I'd recommend finding a practitioner.
Very cool. I recently had Josh Axe on the podcast. We talked a little about traditional Chinese medicine, but I love those fascial release stuff, and I love that movement stuff. So thank you for coming on the podcast, my friend. My greatest hope is that you and I get to share a steak sometime. And if that means I come to Australia, I can handle it, because it's supposed to be amazing there. But I hope our paths will cross at some point in the future.
Well, it definitely will. Yeah, we're on the same mission. I love what you're doing too. Thank you for all the work. I love that you're making this accessible for the people out there.
Yeah, thanks, man. All right, I'll talk to you soon.
See you, Paul.